Hello everyone and welcome to this month's Top 10 video, which is going to be a little bit more than a Top 10. It's going to be the culmination of the series of live streams that I was doing throughout all of 2018. And for those of you who don't know, throughout the year I went back and rewatched, and in some cases watched for the very first time, every single episode of Saturday Night's Main Event and Clash of the Champions. 36 editions of Saturday Night's Main Event and 35 episodes of Clash of the Champions. So it was a lot to get through. But it was a lot of fun doing it. And thanks again to everybody that participated in those live streams, because it was something that I really enjoyed. And if you would like to participate in my next series of live streams in 2019, you can go ahead and vote on which WrestleMania matches you want me to watch, relive, and review and comment on. The polls are held in a Google document, and the links to that document is down below in the description. So if you have not voted yet, you have until February 1st of 2019 to do so. So plenty of time, but it'll be here before you know it. And here we are, Clash of the Champions, Saturday Night's Main Event. I've watched every single episode, and now I'm going to cover the best and the worst of both shows. I'm going to talk about the most valuable players and the least valuable players, the best and worst episodes, and the best and worst matches of both shows. So this is probably going to be a fairly lengthy video, but I took my notes. I had everything recorded. I've actually been tracking this all year long. Getting ready for this video, and now I finally get to do it. So let's go ahead and get started with Saturday Night's Main Event, the major televised specials on NBC held by the WWF during the Rock and Wrestling era and the Hulk Hogan era. And really from 85 to 92, Saturday Night's Main Event was a staple of WWF programming. As I've talked about before, once Monday Night Raw came around, Saturday Night's Main Event was really no longer needed, and it faded into obscurity. They tried to bring it back in 2006. We all know how that turned out. Those of you who watch my live stream know exactly what I think of those episodes, but Saturday Night's Main Event, there really isn't any wrestling show in existence that makes me feel more nostalgic for pro wrestling than Saturday Night's Main Event. When I think of classic old school WWF, that's exactly what I think of, or the matches and moments that took place in Saturday Night's Main Event, because they really were can't miss events. They were can't miss television. And if you were a wrestling fan, if you were a WWF fan, you had to stay home on Saturday nights and watch Saturday Night's Main Event. Again, there's not really a place for that now in a world that has Raw and SmackDown, but back then, those were some of the only opportunities you had to see Hulk Hogan wrestle. So they were very special, and they were very exciting shows for the most part, and featured huge matches and huge moments and continuations of great feuds. So I've got a lot of love and admiration for Saturday Night's Main Event, and I am here to talk about the best and the worst of that show's history. And we're going to start with the least valuable players, a top 5. Who are the 5 least valuable players in Saturday Night's Main Event history? We're going to start with number 5, and I really hate to say it, but number 5 is going to go to D-Generation X, who played a huge role in the second episode of 2006. DX, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H had reformed and wrestled the Spirit Squad on that episode. And to see what DX became even in the mid-2000s compared to what they were in 1997 when they were cutting edge and awesome was just really sad and pathetic. And the match with the Spirit Squad was just an excuse for Shawn and Triple H to just destroy some guys and make themselves look super awesome and super cool. And yeah, DX was not cool at this point. And it was really unfortunate to go back and really see. It was like, man, they ain't what they were in 97. In 97, they were the most cutting edge, most awesome thing, and here is just kind of sad. Just kind of sad. Number 4, and I really hate to say this one. This number 4 goes to Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was retired in ring at this point in his career, but the revival episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event, they had to have the big stars on there, and Stone Cold Steve Austin came out, and the 2 segments that really stand out for me that involved Austin were the beer drinking contest with JBL on the very first episode of the revival, and the long segment with Vince McMahon detailing the illegitimate son storyline. Both segments were terrible, both segments were overly long, and both segments heavily featured Stone Cold Steve Austin. So as much as this show was synonymous with Hulk Hogan's career, Saturday Night's Main Event was a showcase for Stone Cold Steve Austin at his very worst. And if you are a Stone Cold Steve Austin fan, I highly recommend not watching how he was featured on Saturday Night's Main Event. Number 3 goes to WWE's version of ECW, which was featured in some of the 2006 and 2007 episodes. The end result being some of the worst matches in the show's history. Sabu had a squash match. It was probably the best match that involved the ECW guys. But when you look at that 6-man tag, when you look at the antics of the Boogeyman, when you look at that CM Punk and the Boogeyman versus John Morrison and Big Daddy V main event, WWE's version, their take on ECW, obviously didn't go very well, and it was not showcased very well on Saturday Night's Main Event. We also had Vince McMahon as ECW champion. That was also showcased on Saturday Night's Main Event. So things that most ECW fans would probably like to forget. And honestly, when I think of ECW, I can't think of anything that's more opposed to everything that WWE stands for, and to have ECW featured on a WWE flagship show like Saturday Night's Main Event just doesn't feel quite right. But it wasn't even really the real ECW, so I guess it fit. Number 2 goes to the Divas, minus Trish and Mickie, who had an awesome moment on the first Revival episode, the best moment of that episode. I would even argue the best moment of the Revival period from 2006 to 2008, where Mickie James turned on Trish Stratus. That was awesome. Every other time they involved the Divas in these shows, it was horrible. We had Diva bull riding, because that's compelling television. And then we had them featured as ring announcers throughout an entire episode, and each one was worse than the last. These girls, I hate to say something incredibly sexist, like girls are better seen, not heard. They definitely made a case for it, because they were awful, awful ring announcers, and it's better to get girls like ones who are actually trained to be ring announcers and not just get these models who they've rushed into the ring to get a bunch of female performers and then rush them behind a microphone because they need ring announcers for the night or whatever. But in any case, the Divas being featured was sadly not a highlight of the Revival episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event, but for the most part, they were very nice to look at, so I'll give them that. And the number 1 least valuable player of Saturday Night's Main Event, I'm going to give to the Great Khali, who was heavily featured in some of the Revival episodes. I've noticed that and I didn't do this necessarily by design, it was just gut reaction, but all 5 of the least valuable players come from the Revival period of Saturday Night's Main Event, which was the weakest period of Saturday Night's Main Event, so I guess it makes sense. But the Great Khali, he had the squash match against Cena, he had a squash match against Jimmy Wang Yang, and you look at what an important fixture Andre was to Saturday Night's Main Event, especially in the early episodes, and you really see what a star Andre was, and then you look at Khali, who I guess should have been the heir apparent, and he didn't have the gravitas, he didn't have the solid booking behind him, didn't have the natural magnetic charm of Andre, or even when Andre was a heel, he didn't have the natural menace that Andre had. So he just came across like a lesser version of Andre the Giant, and why he was featured so heavily for as long as he was, while not booking him correctly. That was the other thing. It's all right, if you're gonna book a Giant, don't have him lose on pay-per-view all the time, which they did. They had Cena beat him twice, so it's just kind of then Undertaker beat him, and it was who cares? But for Great Khali, granted, they did give him squash matches on Saturday Night's Main Event, which is the best way to showcase him. But seeing him showcased on these Revival episodes was just a reminder of just how bad he was back in the day. So. that concludes that list. To balance it out, let's talk about the most valuable players in Saturday Night's Main Event history. We're going to do a top 10, the top 10 most valuable players in Saturday Night's Main Event history. Number 10, controversial pick, but I'm going to give it to Zeus. I think Zeus, for all his limitations and for the fact that he was an actor, not a wrestler, I think he was involved in some of the most memorable moments in Saturday Night's Main Event history. His debut where he attacked Hogan right before Hogan's cage match with the Big Boss Man, the showdown where Beefcake and Hogan had the dueling chairs and stared down Zeus, and even Zeus's involvement during the Hogan DiBiase match right before Survivor Series 1989. I thought Zeus was presented very, very well, and probably the best moments of his career, his wrestling career, were captured on Saturday Night's Main Event. So to that end, I thought Zeus was a positive influence on the show rather than a negative one. Number 9, the managers, the Bobby Heenans, the Jimmy Harts, the Doctor of Style, Slick, Mr. Fuji, Queen Sherry. Managers were such a great part of old school wrestling, and when you look at Paul Heyman today, you really do see the value of managers, and why they moved away from that, I don't know, because it's great to give guys mouthpieces, it's great to have like an extra angle in matches, an extra I don't want to say prop, but an extra performer to help add to the drama. They're very valuable, and you definitely see that in these shows, especially when you look at what Heenan was able to provide and what Jimmy Hart was able to provide, and Slick, and all these other ones, Sensational Sherry, Mr. Fuji, all the other ones I've named, Johnny Valiant, so many great managers were around during that time period, and that was really one of the things that, going back and watching these old episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event, I realized how much I missed the managers, and especially Bobby, because Bobby Heenan was just the best. He really was. Number 8 goes to the 8th wonder of the world, Andre the Giant, who was initially featured as a babyface in the earlier episodes, having a few big moments, mainly the tag match with Hogan against Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy. And then once he turned heel, he was featured in some big matches, interfering on King Kong Bundy's behalf against Hogan in a couple of title matches, being a second to Ted DiBiase in 1988. He got to challenge Randy Savage for the world title in 1988 as well. He also, probably his most famous match from Saturday Night's Main Event was the Intercontinental title match he had with the Ultimate Warrior, which was probably the best match they had together. It was actually a pretty solid match. Way better than you would expect it to be, considering how limited Warrior was and how, in poor health Andre was. But they actually had a pretty solid match, much to my surprise. And Andre, even at this point in his career and this point in his life, you really do see what kind of a star he was, and how putting him into a match could really be a major attraction for a show. And it was nice to go back and relive some of that stuff. And then right after Andre, we're going to go right to number 7, Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, one of the best gimmicks to come out of that time period. And my God, DiBiase should have had a run with the world title, like a real one. And I know I already did the video talking about how I feel like his phantom run as champion should have counted as an official reign, but DiBiase was never a negative on a show. He always added to whatever he was a part of. Even if it was something simple like having a match with Bret Hart in 91 that was pretty solid, even though it ended in a double countout. His match with Randy Savage in 88, right before WrestleMania 4, I think is one of the better matches in Saturday Night's Main Event's history. And the promos and the moments and the matches and everything that DiBiase was a part of. Just a great showcase for a great gimmick, great character, and a great performer playing the role. And DiBiase is someone I look back on very fondly. One of my personal favorite wrestling characters of all time. Then right after him, we've got number 6, another great character from this time period, Jake the Snake Roberts, who was involved in some very memorable angles and feuds in Saturday Night's Main Event history, the most famous of which being his DDT on the outside on the concrete to Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, which set up a match at the next edition of Saturday Night's Main Event, which was actually pretty damn good. He also had a memorable Intercontinental title match against Randy Savage, which was heel versus heel, and was the early portion of getting Jake Roberts to that babyface role that the fans pretty much wanted him to be in. And he actually, his final Saturday Night's Main Event match I thought was very memorable, where he wrestled Randy Savage as the climax of their feud, stemming from 91, where he ruined Savage's wedding reception, and then, moving into 92 and all the stuff that was involved there with Miss Elizabeth, and then The Undertaker's face turn. So Jake Roberts, I thought, played a very big role in Saturday Night's Main Event, and was very crucial in certain episodes, especially with that Steamboat angle was one of the greatest moments in the show's history, and that was enough to get him on the list just on its own. Number 5, we're going to go with an entire division, the tag team division. Remember when tag teams were awesome and were like a huge part of the show? I do. And Saturday Night's Main Event was a huge showcase for the tag team division. When you look at the matches that Demolition and the Brainbusters had, or the Rockers and the Brainbusters, or the Hart Foundation and the British Bulldogs, or the British Bulldogs and the Dream Team, there were a lot of really good tag matches featured on Saturday Night's Main Event. Some of the best matches in the show's history. And just excellent stuff. And it's that type of stuff that makes me so nostalgic for what tag team wrestling used to be. Not just having a wide variety of teams, but also like their different looks, their different styles, their different outfits that they would wear with each other. The the variety and the excitement that you would get out of watching tag team wrestling. Going back and rewatching these episodes really kind of made me fall in love with the art of tag team wrestling all over again. And like I said, like some of the tag team matches we got on the show were some of the best in the show's history. Number 4, I'm going to go with Roddy Piper, who was a huge fixture of the rock and wrestling period as its top heel, eventually transitioned into one of the greatest baby faces, because, I mean, how can you hate Roddy Piper? I especially remember the first edition of Saturday Night's Main Event where he played babyface as being a truly great moment for him, and in the earlier episodes where he the kids trick-or-treated at his house and he fucked with the kids and the kids fucked with him right back, and the stuff where he interfered with Uncle Elmer's wedding and some of the Piper's Pits that were held in the early episodes. He had that wild brawl with Orndorff in one of the earlier episodes. Roddy Piper was a huge contributor to really getting Saturday Night's Main Event off the ground and making it what it ultimately became as one of the big flagship programs for WWE. And Piper's a legend, deserves all the praise that he gets, and I'm more than happy to point it out just how great he really was. Number 3, I'm going to give it to the announce team, actually. Jesse the Body Ventura and Vince McMahon, who were the voices of Saturday Night's Main Event, especially Jesse as color commentator. I think Jesse, you can't really think of Saturday Night's Main Event without thinking of Jesse Ventura. And he didn't commentate every episode. Sometimes Heenan took his place, and Heenan was great as well. And then once Jesse left, he was his role was filled by Roddy Piper and Randy Savage and a couple others. But really, I mean, Jesse Ventura was the voice of Saturday Night's Main Event. It really was his show as far as providing commentary. And Vince McMahon, I always thought, was a very solid play-by-play guy. And I always enjoyed him in play-by-play, and I thought him and Ventura had very good chemistry with each other. So I thought they were a great team together, and I thought, not having them commentate Saturday Night's Main Event doesn't quite feel right. It doesn't feel authentically Saturday Night's Main Event unless it's Jesse and Vince calling the action. And it's also great to get a reminder of what a great commentary team is really like. So, there's that as well. Number 2 is going to go to the Macho Man Randy Savage. Oh, yeah. Who really, I mean, was the one babyface star that could rival Hogan in popularity during that time until the rise of the Ultimate Warrior and all that stuff. But when you look back on Saturday Night's Main Event's history, some of the best matches and moments involved Randy Savage. I already talked about the match he had with Jake, the matches he had with Jake. There was the match he had with Beefcake. That was one of the more surprisingly good matches. This match with DiBiase, I already talked about, was one of the better matches in the show's history. The match he had with Bret Hart, which is probably my personal favorite Saturday Night's Main Event match ever, was a huge match for Bret, and was an excellent match all around. And Just a terrific performer Savage was. And of course, no discussion about Randy Savage on Saturday Night's Main Event would be complete without talking about the Mega Powers and that whole storyline and the moment where they first joined forces with the handshake. One of the most iconic moments in the show's history. So Randy Savage was a huge star, huge performer, and was one of the best things about Saturday Night's Main Event. And was actually... when you look at the guys that held the belt throughout Saturday Night's Main Event history, it was typically Hogan, but Savage also had a lengthy run with the belt, and Warrior was the only other guy. So it was really like you didn't get many different world champions on Saturday Night's Main Event history, but Savage was one of those guys for sure. And number one, very obvious, it's Hulk Hogan. When you look at Hulk Hogan, whenever he wrestled on a Saturday Night's Main Event, it felt like a big deal. The cage match with Orndorff, the cage match with Boss Man, the matches with Bundy, the match with DiBiase, the match with Harley Race, which was one of the more memorable Saturday Night's Main Event matches ever. The match with Bad News Brown, which I think is one of his better ones that kind of flies under the radar. His title match against Terry Funk. His title match against Bob Orton, which was the first match in Saturday Night's Main Event history. No, not the first. It was the second. It was the first world title match in Saturday Night's Main Event history. The first match was the six-man tag, but... Hulk Hogan made Saturday Night's Main Event can't miss. And that's in addition to participating in so many great moments like Perfect stealing his title belt and destroying the belt after the Genius shockingly beat him in the greatest upset in the history of Saturday Night's Main Event. Hogan also, he teamed up with the Ultimate Warrior and they had their big face-off leading into their match at WrestleMania 6. And there, again, the formation of the Mega Powers. The feud with Orndorff carried over on Saturday Night's Main Event. So there's so many things that Hulk Hogan was a part of on this show to really help give this show its identity and make this show feel like it was can't miss and larger than life and one of the flagship programs. And I think Hulk Hogan, I mean, as much as Stone Cold Steve Austin is synonymous with Monday Night Raw, I think Hulk Hogan is synonymous with Saturday Night's Main Event. This was his show, without a doubt. All right, and from there, we're going to move into the matches. What are the best and worst matches in Saturday Night's Main Event history? Well, let's start with number 5. And once again, it's going to mostly be matches that were from the Revival period. Now, I did try to avoid a lot of the shorter matches on the show. A lot of episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event featured what I called end of the show fluff, where you would just get some random match thrown out there like Mr. Perfect in a squash match, or Rick Rude in a squash match, or Texas Tornado in a squash match, or something like that. It was just like a quick 2-3 minute thing, bing, bang, boom, done, show's over. And I tried to avoid those matches for a worst of list because they were A, not that long, and B, just there to kind of pad out the rest of the show. And because they weren't that long, it's like how painful were they really? I really wanted to highlight the stuff that was really, really bad. So, top 5 worst matches in Saturday Night's Main Event history. We're going to start with Edge defending the WWE title against John Cena from episode 33. This was during the Revival period, and just a garbage title match. It was like, man, because again, a lot of the WWE title matches in the older episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event were so good and felt like a big deal. This just felt like something that was thrown together, and it was just kind of a dog shit match, and these two just didn't click with each other, and it was kind of masked by the fact that Cena did like that FU or AA now off the steel steps and through the announce table on the Edge, but it really couldn't hide the fact that this match felt rushed, pointless, stupid, and just didn't really do anything. It was just kind of I would go as far to say it's probably the worst WWE title match in the show's history. And I watched Hulk Hogan versus the Honky Tonk Man, and also Randy Savage versus the One Man Gang. Those matches provided more than this one did. So, also it's John Cena. And I'm just a bitter old man when it comes to him. Number 4, my pick for Hulk Hogan's worst match in Saturday Night's Main Event history. From episode 28, Hulk Hogan and the Tugboat versus Rhythm and Blues. I hated the Rhythm and Blues gimmick. I feel sorry for Greg Valentine every time I see it. It's like they took one of the toughest guys from the 80s and they made him an Elvis impersonator, and a bad one. shit. I felt so bad for Greg, and every time I see that team, it just depresses me. The best thing Rhythm and Blues ever did was giving DDP his WWE on-screen debut. And and the other best thing they did was being a part of The Undertaker's debut, but that was more superfluous than anything else. But in addition to that, I also hated Tugboat as one of, when I think back of like the Hogan Buddy type characters, like the Hillbilly Jims and the Brutus Beefcakes and those types. Tugboat was the worst one of the bunch. And that's no knock on Fred Ottman. That's just Tugboat was fucking lame. And this match, like, Hogan could not save this match. It was just a bunch of gimmicks that I hate, and it was an obvious outcome. You know Hogan and Tugboat are going to win, so not the best match. Hogan's worst from Saturday Night's Main Event, without a doubt. Number 3 was another main event match during the Revival period. Eugene, Kane, and Doink the Clown versus Viscera, Kevin Thorne, and Umaga. Let's take a bunch of shitty gimmicks and monster characters and just throw them together in one match, and let's have this really shitty, boring match. And again, this probably would have passed for end of the show fluff if it wasn't as long as it was, but it got like 10 minutes from bell to bell, and I'm like, oh my god. And those 10 minutes, I felt every single one of those minutes and then some. It couldn't end fast enough. Number 2 is another main event during the Revival period, episode 35. I've already referenced it earlier. CM Punk and the Boogeyman versus John Morrison and Big Daddy V. This match was fucking awful, with the worms being spread out over the ring, and it's just Punk and Morrison just could not overcome like the shittiness of everything that they had to deal with in this particular match. It was, I thought that maybe Punk and Morrison could make something out of this, and they did not. It was a painfully dull, painfully sloppy match that didn't do any favors for anybody involved. And the worst match in Saturday Night's Main Event history, I don't even know if this counts as a match, but I'm going to say it anyway. From episode 32, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus JBL in the beer drinking contest. Yeah, again, I don't know if this counts as a match for a lot of people, but you know what? Fuck it. The boxing matches count as matches. It's a contest. I'll count it. I'm fucking counting it. This segment was long, terrible, painful, a waste of time, and a horrible use of both Stone Cold Steve Austin and JBL, who tried to save the segment with his classic heel promos, but it just wasn't working. It didn't work for anything, and it just this match didn't work. It was bad. This segment was bad. It was painful. It dragged on forever, and I was happy when it was over. So Stone Cold Steve Austin versus JBL in a beer drinking contest gets my pick for worst match in Saturday Night's Main Event history. Now, I could have also gone with the Diva Bull Riding, but thankfully that was at least somewhat brief. Could have gone with one of the boxing matches, but Evander Holyfield actually added a little bit of glitz and glamour to it. And the Mr. T Bob Orton boxing match was actually a lot of fun, I thought. So this one, there was also the arm wrestling contest between Lashley and Mark Henry, which was bad as well, but it wasn't as bad as this. So that's my pick. Some people might think I'm cheating with that one, picking that as my worst, but whatever. It pained me, and I want to point out how much it pained me. And from there, we go into the best matches from Saturday Night's Main Events history. I'm going to do a top 15, my top 15 favorite matches in Saturday Night's Main Event history. Starting at number 15, we've got one of their classic tag matches that I alluded to earlier, the Rockers versus the Hart Foundation from episode 27. I mean, it's Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels in their youth when they were part of excellent tag teams, two of the best tag teams in company history, having a really good match on Saturday Night's Main Event. It was just great stuff. Excellent match. I loved it. Number 14, a very weird pairing for the WWF title, but a great one nonetheless. Hulk Hogan defending the gold against Terry Funk from episode 4. I really enjoyed this episode with Terry's brawling style and just Hogan brings a lot of spotlight and star power to the situation. So just for being such a unique pairing and two guys that I've never really seen work with each other before in any kind of single setting other than this match, I think it's just such a weird, rare pairing that it's enjoyable. Very similar to what I felt about the Chris Jericho Raven match when I did my top 10 Halloween Havoc matches. I really got a kick out of seeing Hogan and Funk work with each other. So this was an enjoyable match for me. Number 13, it's actually going to be a tie. There were two matches between the Rockers and the Brainbusters. One from episode 20 and one from episode 24 that was a 2 out of 3 falls match that turned out to be the Brainbusters' final match in the company. I couldn't pick which one I liked more, so I just said, fuck it, I'll put both. Both are great. Both are really solid tag team matches that I highly recommend going out of your way to see. You get the great high-flying, fast-paced team in the Rockers going up against the kind of more classical pro wrestling style guys. I mean, the Brainbusters, they were Arn and Tully were like what the Revival is now before the Revival got ruined. But the Brainbusters could work well with any team they were put in there with, and the Rockers were just excellent. So, you put them together, you get 2 really great matches out of it. Number 12, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat versus Jake the Snake Roberts in the Snake Pit match from episode 7. I talked about the famous spot where Jake Roberts DDT'd Steamboat on the concrete. That set up this match, which was great and was one of those matches that really made it feel like, oh my God, Saturday Night's Main Event is like a free pay-per-view where you're going out of your way to see this awesome grudge match that was set up on the previous episode. And I thought the match was great. I thought they worked very well with each other. And, these two had really good chemistry, I thought. I enjoyed their match at the big event, too. I thought they probably had the match of the night on that particular show from 1986. So, great characters with a great setup, with a great angle, and then you get to the match, and it's really good. So, very enjoyable match. Number 11, another match that involves Jake the Snake Roberts, Macho Man Randy Savage versus Jake for the Intercontinental title from episode 8 of Saturday Night's Main Event. This is the one I alluded to earlier. That was basically a heel versus heel match, but was a baby step towards getting Roberts into that babyface role that he worked very well in. This is one of the matches that comes up a lot when people talk about Saturday Night's Main Event, and I can see why. It's a very good match. I think it's a great one, especially when you consider the talents involved and the fact that they were both heels and able to make it work as well as they did. Because to me, like a heel versus heel match is almost impossible because the fans are bound to cheer for somebody. And sure enough, they picked Jake. And I thought this was a very good match that they had with each other. I also, as a runner-up almost, I also liked the match they had in '92. Right before WrestleMania 8. I was a fan of that one as well. So Jake and Savage, they worked well with each other. Number 10 is another tie. There were 2 matches in Saturday Night's Main Event history that involved the British Bulldogs and the Dream Team. Their first match was right before their match at WrestleMania 2 on episode 5. And their second match on Saturday Night's Main Event, their third major match overall. So I guess you could say when you look at their 2 Saturday Night's Main Event matches and their WrestleMania 2 match, it's kind of this nice little tag team trilogy. But you had the British Bulldogs defending their tag team titles against the Dream Team, Brutus Beefcake and Greg Valentine, in a 2 out of 3 falls match. And again, this was on episode 7. Excellent matches. I thought these 2 teams worked very well with each other. I really liked the finish on the first one in episode 5 as well. And I thought, again, you want tag team greatness, you want tag team excellence. Check these matches out, man, because they're really flipping good. And, the Bulldogs and the Dream Team, that's probably one of the more underrated, tag team series, because when you look at the 2 matches they had on Saturday Night's Main Event, you look at the match they had at WrestleMania 2, where I thought they had the match of the night on that show, it's like, man, why don't more people talk about the matches that these 2 teams had? Because they're really flipping good. But in any case, they're there for you to watch right there on the WWE Network. Again, WrestleMania 2, Saturday Night's Main Event number 5, and Saturday Night's Main Event number 7. Check them out. They're great. Number 9, a tag team match that on paper you probably wouldn't expect to be very good. Hulk Hogan and the Junkyard Dog versus the Funk Brothers from episode 6. I thought this was great. It was a wild, chaotic match. Again, you get to see Hulk Hogan work with Terry Funk and his brother Dory, who was called Haas Funk here for some reason. And I think the Junkyard Dog brought a lot of intrigue and excitement as well. And this might be the most surprisingly really good match in Saturday Night's Main Event history. When I watched it the first time, I was like, man, that was a really exciting tag match. Again, it's episode 6. This one opened up the show, and I thought was a great start to the show. There was some brawling outside the ring, which was rare back then. Again, they kind of picked up... they kind of picked up where JYD and the Funks left off at WrestleMania 2, where Junkyard Dog teamed up with Tito, and that match was wild as well, one of the better matches on WrestleMania 2. So this kind of picked up right where they left off, in addition to Hogan's title match against Terry Funk as well. So all these intersecting storylines kind of meeting together in this very exciting match. I thought, again, I think it's one of the hidden gems in the show's history, and I highly recommend checking it out. Number 8 is one that I've already talked about. Randy Savage versus Ted DiBiase from episode 15, kind of a prelude to their tournament finals at WrestleMania 4. You've got a great heel in Ted DiBiase. You've got a great budding babyface megastar in Randy Savage. And you put them together and they made magic. There's really all there is to say about it. I think that they had an excellent match here that really set the stage for their WrestleMania 4 match very, very well. And really set up the need that Savage was going to need Hogan as an equalizer to cancel out Andre. And but yeah, I thought this was a great, well-wrestled match between two guys that knew how to get it done and had great chemistry with each other. It's a shame that they didn't have a one. I mean, granted, I love the main event to SummerSlam '88, but it's a shame we never got Savage and DiBiase one-on-one on pay-per-view. One of the downfalls of only having 4 pay-per-views a year. If it were monthly pay-per-views, we definitely would have gotten this match on a big stage on pay-per-view. But then the Saturday night's main event wouldn't have been as special now, would it? So, you know, it is what it is. Number 7, a match I've already alluded to, Hulk Hogan versus Bad News Brown from episode 20. Again, kind of a hidden gem. When you look at Hogan's best throughout Saturday night's main event, this one doesn't come up a lot, and I'm a little surprised by that. I thought it was an excellent match. Bad News Brown, I think, is a guy that maybe if he was younger at this point, he probably would have been like an excellent choice as like a world title contender, maybe even world title holder. I've made the comparison before. I think he was a precursor to Stone Cold Steve Austin, just that kind of like awesome, badass loner heel that hates the other heels. I think his walkouts at Survivor Series were some of the best character moments I remember from the time period. Him turning on Bret at WrestleMania 4 when they decided to be co-winners at the Battle Royal, I thought was great. I think Bad News Brown brought a believable badassness to the show, and I thought he worked really well with Hogan. I thought they had a very good match here. He also worked very well with Savage. If you have a chance, see if you can find, they may be on the network, I'm not sure, but he had some really good matches with Randy Savage in late '88 as well for the title. Great wild brawls. It's like, man, maybe they missed the boat on Bad News. I was saying maybe he was too old by this point. It was like, I don't know. He worked well with Hogan. He worked well with Savage. Maybe they could have done something with Bad News, because I thought his character was great, and I thought it led to some very exciting matches with some of the top stars in the company. So if you have not seen Hogan versus Bad News Brown, again, it's episode 20 right before WrestleMania 5. I highly recommend checking it out. Number 6 is one of the most significant matches in Saturday night's main event history, Demolition versus the Brain Busters for the WWF Tag Team titles in a 2 out of 3 falls match from episode 22. This match is significant for the reason that it is the only NBC episode of Saturday night's main event to feature a title change. It's the only one, and only one of 2 title changes in the show's history. The other one being Shawn Michaels' Intercontinental title win in '92 when the show was on Fox. But as far as the NBC episodes are concerned, again, I'm not counting the main event special, so you know Andre's title win doesn't count. But Demolition versus the Brain Busters for the WWF Tag Team titles. Very good match. Excellent match. Again, Demolition more the brawler types, Brain Busters more the classical wrestling heel types. And it made for a very exciting match. Great tag team action. And the fact that the Brain Busters actually defeated Demolition for the tag titles, ending Demolition's record-setting tag team title reign, which stood for years until the New Day broke it, years and years later, decades later. This is a historically significant match, one of the most significant in the show's history, and one of my personal favorites in the show's history as well. So, you know, it really highlights just how big Saturday night's main event was. That a match like this was featured. Legendary tag title reign comes to an end, major title change on the show. They got the main event spot. This wasn't a main event fluff spot. They got to close out the show, so you got to see like the best thing on the show close it out, and it was excellent. Great stuff. My personal favorite tag team match in the show's history, which says a lot because, as I've said before, there were a lot of great tag matches in the show's history. Number 5, Hulk Hogan versus King Harley Race from episode 15. I would say Harley Race is easily his best match during his run in the WWF, where he was past his prime by this point. But he did get to have this really excellent match with Hogan. Very exciting, crazy stuff, ahead of its time, with Harley doing a swan dive headbutt right through a table that did not break and was not designed to break, clearly. And Harley Race infamously got injured in this match, but it doesn't change the fact that to see these two legendary champions clashing off with each other and having this really exciting, wild brawl of a match, it was really great and good for history, again, to get Hogan versus Harley Race at some point, and to get this really exciting, short but sweet sprint of a wild brawl of a match on Saturday night's main event. I thought made for an excellent showing for both men, and I thought it was great. Number 4 is probably the most famous match in Saturday night's main event history, probably the biggest, most significant match in the show's history. From episode 9, Hulk Hogan defends the WWF title in a steel cage match against Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. The climax to their feud, where Orndorff turned on Hogan, and the series of matches they had that always ended in disqualifications or countouts. You look at the earlier showdown they had on Saturday night's main event, and the big event, which ended with a schmoz. Back in these days, the steel cage match was used to settle those feuds, and to settle, if you can't have a clean finish, we'll put him in a steel cage and you'll get your clean finish. And we almost got a schmoz again, where we had the infamous double ending where both men's feet hit the floor at the same time on the escape, and the match had to be restarted. And Hogan ultimately prevailed. It was one of the biggest matches in the show's history. I would even argue, again, the number 1 biggest match in the show's history, and a great climax to a great feud. You can't ask for anything more than that. Number 3, a cage match that I enjoyed even more. Hulk Hogan defending the WWF title against the Big Boss Man from episode 21, once again in a steel cage. These two had a series of steel cage matches. I talked about the one they had in MSG, which I had on a Best of Hulkamania tape, and was very, very good. I probably preferred that match over this one, but in Saturday night's main event's history, it's the best cage match in the show's history, one of only 2, I think, if memory serves me right. And excellent match, and again, it was helped by the fact that Zeus attacked Hogan before the bell, which helped set it apart from all the other cage matches that that Boss Man and Hogan had with each other. But every Hogan Boss Man cage match had that famous spot where Hogan superplexed the Boss Man off the top of the cage, which looked insane back then, to see Hulk Hogan, who hardly did anything, superplex a 350-pound man off the top of a steel cage. It looked insane, looked crazy, and the fact that they did this in every match they had with each other is just mind-boggling to me. In an era where that type of stuff just wasn't done, and from guys who you wouldn't expect in a million years to do spots like that. I thought it was an excellent match. Hogan's personal best in Saturday night's main event. I'll go that far. Hogan's personal best, which is saying a lot, because I think Hogan had, as I've highlighted on this list, had a lot of really, really good matches. And that's always great to see. Number 2, for the Intercontinental title on episode 27, a match that was a match of champions in a way. Mr. Perfect taking on Tito Santana for the Intercontinental title, a match that was damn good, damn excellent. And again, you look at the show, this was the match of champions. You had Demolition defending the tag titles against the Rockers. Pretty solid match. You had Ultimate Warrior defending the world title against Rick Rude to set up their SummerSlam cage match. Perfectly solid match. And Warrior and Rude always worked well together. So you got Perfect versus Santana. It's kind of the least sexy out of the bunch on paper, but then you remember, oh wait, Perfect and Santana are excellent workers. And for those however long they were in the ring, they made people forget, oh wait, Tito has absolutely no prayer of winning the title here. And they went out there and had an excellent, exciting match. One of the best uses of a ref bump I think I've ever seen, where the ref didn't sell it like it was unconscious. He sold it like he twisted his leg, and it was really, really slow rather than just being dead. And I thought that was more believable than what you normally see from a ref bump. And a lot of excitement out of this match. Very well wrestled match. Really an indicator of what Mr. Perfect and Tito Santana were capable of. Curt Hennig, outstanding worker. This match highlights that. Tito Santana, outstanding worker. This match highlights that. And definitely go check this match out. I think it's, again, I have it at number 2 as one of the best matches in the show's history. But my number 1 is one that I've already mentioned. Randy Savage versus Bret the Hitman Hart from episode 13. Kind of a dream match pairing. Bret Hart was not a finished product at this point. We would have liked to have gotten this match in '94 when Bret was like a main event star and Savage still had something to offer. But to see this match in 1987, when Bret was still cutting his teeth and kind of getting, fitting into the WWF, and Randy Savage was slowly, or I should say quickly working his way up to becoming one of the top stars in the company. He had actually just formed the Mega Powers with Hulk Hogan on the previous episode, resulting in this match. And I thought this was an excellent, dramatic match and a great showcase for both guys. Savage selling the leg injury, Bret being the resilient heel. This could have easily turned into just Savage getting an easy win, and instead we got an excellent encounter between, as it turns out, guys that would go on to be major main event stars and legends within the WWE. So even though we didn't get this match at the time we would have wanted it in 93, 94, we did get it here, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I think it's the best match in Saturday Night's Main Event history. So if you're looking for something to check out, if you're a Bret Hart fan and you're a Randy Savage fan, episode 13 of Saturday Night's Main Event has got you covered, because I think that this match was absolutely stellar. And now let's close out my talk of Saturday Night's Main Event by talking about my top favorite and my picks for the worst episodes in the show's history. So we're going to do a top 5 worst episodes and top 10 best episodes. And starting with the worst episodes, number 5, episode 16 from April 1988. This was the first show after Randy Savage won the title at WrestleMania 4, and it featured his first televised title defense against the One Man Gang, which it's nice, but it's not. When you look at the matches that Hogan had in Saturday Night's Main Event, that one's not one of Savage's grander moments. It just kind of feels like an ordinary match, which is like, I would have wanted Savage's first title defense on TV to be something bigger than that. And unfortunately, the rest of the show is kind of flat as well. It's just a bunch of flat matches that didn't really do anything to interest me. So something that I felt should have been a big deal, Savage's first show as champion, for Saturday Night's Main Event as champion, was kind of disappointing. And that's kind of sad. Number 4 from the Revival period in August 2007, episode 35. This is the one that featured Evander Holyfield versus Matt Hardy in a boxing match, and that aforementioned abomination of a main event with CM Punk and the Boogeyman taking on John Morrison and Big Daddy V. Terrible show. That's really all there is to say. I hated the Revival period of Saturday Night's Main Event. I hated it. And no, this was not the worst episode of the bunch, so we've got more to go. Next up, number 3, episode 28 from October 1990. This was the infamous Oktoberfest episode, which I did not enjoy. This episode also featured the aforementioned Hogan Tugboat versus Rhythm and Blues match. It also featured the very disappointing Ultimate Warrior and Legion of Doom versus Demolition match, which should have been really cool and wasn't. Just kind of felt like Demolition was being fed to the wolves here, to the Legion of Doom and the Ultimate Warrior. When you look at how unfunny the Oktoberfest segments were, and you look at how poor like some of the bigger matches were, like the Hogan match didn't deliver, the Warrior match didn't deliver, this show really left a lot to be desired. The only thing that kind of worked was Ted DiBiase confronting Dustin Rhodes, and Dustin Rhodes getting involved in the angle with Dusty. That was really the only thing on the show I enjoyed. Everything else was just terrible. And the Oktoberfest skits, I can't say enough how bad they are. They are really bad. If you think bad comedy is a new thing in WWE, you are sadly mistaken, my friend, because these were awful. Number 2, episode 33 from July 2006. This is the one that had DX and the Spirit Squad, Cena versus Edge, and the Diva bull riding. Nothing redeeming about this show, at least not off the top of my head. Very bad stuff all around. I hated almost all of this. It was bad. It was really bad. It was bad, it was bad, it was bad. But sadly, it was not the worst. The worst episode, I'm going to give it to the July 2007 episode, number 34. This is the one that featured the, we'll call them comedy antics of Hornswoggle and the Little Boogeyman, and how they interrupted the best part of the show, which was Kelly's Extreme Expose, purely for smut reasons, and then, Hornswoggle and the Little Boogeyman had to go out there and ruin it. There was nothing funny about what they were doing with each other. It was terrible. It was awful. You had that freak show six-man tag main event that I talked about that was awful. You had Great Khali squashing John Cena, which was kind of funny, but really did little except set up their next pay-per-view match, which I did not care about. And I've actually never seen that match, but people have told me it's good. I don't know. It's like one of the best matches that Khali ever had. And I'm like, all right, sure. But they weren't doing anything to make me excited for it. And this episode did not make me want to go check it out either. So, yeah, that's my pick for the very worst episode in Saturday Night's Main Event history. But there was way more good than bad. Let's talk about the best stuff from Saturday Night's Main Event's long and illustrious history. Let's pull up my list. Number 10, I'm going to give the episode 9 from January 1987. This is the one that featured Hogan versus Orndorff in the steel cage, so it has the biggest match in the show's history, but also features a lot of build-ups for WrestleMania 3. There was a Savage versus George Steele match, which was used to build Savage and Steamboat and what happened at that show. You had Junkyard Dog's first match with Harley Race, which was used to build into their humiliation match at WrestleMania 3. And you had Piper versus Adonis in their first showdown, which would lead into what would be Piper's first retirement match at WrestleMania 3. So a lot of great build-up to WrestleMania 3 here, and the biggest main event in the show's history. So very entertaining episode all around. Number 9, I'm going to give to 24 from November 1989. You had Ultimate Warrior versus Andre the Giant, which is probably Warrior's best match from Saturday Night's Main Event. Either that or the tag match with Hogan taking on Genius and Perfect. But speaking of the Genius, this is also the famous episode where the Genius defeated Hulk Hogan by countout, the biggest upset in the show's history, and then Mr. Perfect stole Hogan's belt and then destroyed it with a hammer. Great angle, one of the best angles in the show's history, and then we followed it up, we closed out the show with an excellent 2 out of 3 falls match between the Rockers and the Brainbusters. So great action, great angles, great stories, excellent episode. Next up, number 8, episode 20 from March 1989. This is the one that included the Hulk Hogan versus Bad News Brown match that I talked about. It also included the first Brainbusters versus Rockers match, which was excellent. But the big angle on the show was Elizabeth's big decision. Whose corner is she going to be in at WrestleMania 5, Randy Savage or Hulk Hogan? Big angle that needed to happen, considering what happened on the main event where Savage turned on Hogan and how the main event was set up. Hogan versus Savage, the Mega Powers explode. Elizabeth was going to have to pick a side, and this was the show that highlighted that. So very exciting episode, both with great matches and a great big angle to set it apart from all the other episodes. All right, and number 7, I'm going to give to episode 22 from July 1989. 1989 was a great year for Saturday Night's Main Event. This is the one that had it had Hulk Hogan versus Honky Tonk Man for the title, which was not one of the better world title matches in the show's history, but where it really heated up was with the Brutus Beefcake versus Randy Savage match, which was excellent, and then followed up, like probably the best match in Beefcake's career, except for maybe the Bulldog Dream Team matches. And that got followed up with the very well done angle post-match where Hogan and Beefcake had the steel chairs and confronted Zeus, which I said is one of the best moments in the show's history. So, people can shit on Zeus and they can shit on Beefcake, but they helped make all of that happen, so can't fight them too much. And this is also the episode that features the famous Demolition tag title loss to the Brain Busters in a 2 out of 3 falls match. So it has the only title change on NBC, has a major angle, and has two excellent matches, Beefcake and Savage and Demolition versus Brain Busters. So yeah, it's one of the biggest shows in the event's history, and I think it's definitely one that's worth checking out. Next up is Saturday Night's. I kind of was torn here. Which one do I put on here? Do I put on Saturday Night's Main Event number 12, which had the Mega Powers uniting, which was the biggest, or arguably the biggest moment in the history of the show? Or do I do this episode, which I ultimately went with, which was number 13, which is the show that was held on November 1987, and while it didn't have the big angle that episode 12 did, I think this one was a more complete show, mainly because it had 2 stellar matches on it, big main event matches, Randy Savage versus Bret Hart, which is my favorite match in the show's history, and Hulk Hogan defending the WWF title against King Kong Bundy, which Bundy shockingly won by countout, which set up a rematch between the two on a later edition of Saturday Night's Main Event, and a famous angle with Andre the Giant that set up Hogan's rematch with Andre at the main event in February '88. So a lot of big stuff here, but really it's those 2 big matches that made it feel like a really huge episode, and one of the more memorable episodes in the show's history. Number 5 is going to go to number 21 from May 1989. This is the one with the Hogan Bossman Steel Cage match for the title. The debut of Zeus. The first Brain Busters versus Demolition match on Saturday Night's Main Event. And even a surprisingly solid match between Jim Duggan and Rick Rude. From start to finish, this is just a very exciting show. Excellent stuff. You also had Randy Savage featured as well, which is also nice. He got to, I believe, who did he work with here? It was either Jim Neidhart or Jimmy Snuka. I don't remember which. But either way, you did get a Randy Savage match on the show. And but yeah, the Zeus angle was very memorable. The cage match was great. Brain Busters versus Demolition was very good. And even Duggan had like a really good match on the show. So very exciting episode. And again, it's 1989 again. They really came through in '89. Next up, we're going to go to 1986, probably the second best year in the show's history. From May 1986, this was the 6th edition of Saturday Night's Main Event, so it took place right after WrestleMania 2. This is the episode that had the Hogan and JYD versus the Funk Brothers match that I talked about earlier, which I think is one of the most overlooked and underrated matches in the show's history. You had Adrian Adonis taking on Paul Orndorff in a really good match, surprisingly good. And you also had the Bulldogs taking on Sheik and Volkov in a really good tag team match. So you had a bunch of really good matches on the show, but the best part of the show is that this was the episode that had the famous Jake Roberts DDT onto Ricky Steamboat on the concrete, probably the best angle in the show's history. So very memorable episode, one of the best. And this was where they were really starting to find their groove, because I think the earlier episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event were very theme-based. Like one had a Mother's Day theme, and one had a Halloween theme, and one had a beach theme or whatever. And I think around episode 5, leading into WrestleMania 2, they kind of started putting big angles and big matches on the show. And this was kind of the next step of that, where you had the big angle with Jake Roberts and Ricky Steamboat, and a lot of really good matches on there too, showcasing a lot of their big stars. So yeah, this was kind of like a blueprint episode for Saturday Night's Main Event, and I think it's one of the best in the show's history, obviously. All right, next up is number 27. This was the Night of Champions, held in July 1990, where you had Ultimate Warrior versus Rick Rude for the WWF title. You had Demolition versus the Rockers for the tag titles. And you had that excellent IC title match between Tito Santana and Mr. Perfect for the IC title. And this also featured Hulk Hogan's return to TV after being put out by the earthquake. So, 3 really big matches, one excellent match with the IC title match, and the big angle with Hogan's return. So, excellent episode all around, and one of the most, probably the last great episode in the show's history, I would say. Hard to believe that the next one right after that was the Oktoberfest episode, but All right, number 2, I'm going to give it to number 15, which is the one that was my favorite episode prior to me starting these live streams. This was the one I remembered being my personal favorite. From March 1988, this was right before WrestleMania 4, right after the main event where Andre stole the belt from Hogan with the dual referees and gave the belt to DiBiase and set up the tournament and all of that jazz. So, but what this show had, it was a nice like stepping stone leading into WrestleMania 4, where you got Hogan in a big match with Harley Race, which I've already put over. You had Savage and DiBiase in a preview match of what they would ultimately have in the finals of WrestleMania 4. And you even had a battle of former tag team partners as Greg Valentine took on Brutus Beefcake. The Dream Team explodes. One of the better matches of Beefcake's career. You know, people shit on Brutus Beefcake, but I thought this match was really good. I thought the match he had with Savage was really good, and even the hair versus hair match with Outlaw Ron Bass was a good grudge match in the show's history. So Beefcake, some of his best work came out of Saturday night's main event. Who knew? But yeah, this episode is excellent, and I think it sets the stage for WrestleMania 4 very, very well. But my number one favorite in Saturday night's main event's history, my favorite episode now that I've watched them all, came in October 1986. This was episode 7. This is the one that featured Hulk Hogan versus Paul Orndorff in their first Saturday night's main event match, and the DQ finish necessitated that a cage match would be held in January. You had Jake Roberts taking on Ricky Steamboat in a follow-up to their memorable angle from the previous episode. You had the Bulldogs versus the Dream Team in their final match together on Saturday night's main event, an excellent match. And you also had Rowdy Roddy Piper as a babyface running around and unintentionally helping Hulk Hogan. I love the stare down that those two had, where it was like Hogan wasn't really sure what to make of Piper now that he was a babyface, and he was attacking everybody in sight. He had a quick win over the Iron Sheik where he beat him in like a minute, and he cut a very good promo at another point in the show as well. So if you're a huge fan of Roddy Piper, this show showcased him very, very well, especially as a babyface. And you had a lot of really good matches here as well with Hogan, Orndorff, Jake and Steamboat, Bulldogs and Dream Team. This one felt like a free pay-per-view. This one, of all the episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event, a lot of them had like a pay-per-view vibe to them. This one especially did, when you consider the huge grudges, huge matches, all building to this point. And it's like, you put a clean finish on Hogan Orndorff and reverse the order of the matches, this would be like a really good pay-per-view. Like, you know, it's, so yeah, I think Saturday Night's Main Event, episode 7, October 86, it's my favorite episode in the show's history, and a great showcase of the best of what Saturday Night's Main Event had to offer. Okay, everyone, now that we have wrapped up with Saturday Night's Main Event, let's close this video out by talking about the best and the worst of the Clash of the Champions, the premier wrestling special brought to us by Jim Crockett Promotions, NWA, which eventually evolved into WCW. And going all the way from 1988 to 1997, it covers a huge stretch of time. And I mentioned this in the live stream, but it's really interesting to see how through the Clash of the Champions, if you watch every single episode, it kind of works as like an abridged version of WCW's history, like the evolution from Jim Crockett into WCW, and then the rise and fall of, well, not so much the fall, because we end at 97 when they're at their peak, but to see it evolve from where it was into 1997, where it's the top wrestling promotion in the world, that to me is pretty awesome. And again, you don't get the full history, but you get like a nice, like, abridged version of what the history was like and what that evolution was like. So that was cool to see. Through all the good and the bad, there was plenty to appreciate about Clash of the Champions. But with that said, much like Saturday Night's Main Event, we're going to cover the best and the worst, starting with the least valuable players and the most valuable players. We've got 5 LVPs and 10 MVPs. Least valuable players for the Clash, starting at number 5, we've got the Shockmaster, who has probably the most famous botch in the history of pro wrestling. And the fact that the botch is so famous and so well known in wrestling circles, and it's so popular among us that we get like this sick pleasure out of the botch, that kept him from being number 1 on this list. It's like, well, I mean, it is a memorable moment that has stood the test of time, and I think we all love the Shockmaster in a completely perverse way. Then number 4, we've got the Black Scorpion, Sting's first major program after becoming the champion and winning the belt from Flair. The mysterious masked man who performed magic tricks and was playing mind games with Sting. This angle didn't work for me. It was disappointing that after Sting finally won the belt, this was the first program he got saddled with. It's like, oh, come on, you couldn't do any better than that. But Yeah, so that's just more of a disappointment than anything else. It probably could have worked if it was executed better, but as is, it was just a huge dud. Speaking of duds, we've got a tag team on the list next. The Dynamic Dudes, a horribly dated late 80s, early 90s style tag team with a skater gimmick that looked royally uncool even back then. Johnny Ace, I think it's safe to say, worked better as a behind-the-scenes guy. And Shane Douglas would move on to do bigger and better things in ECW. The Dynamic Dudes were so unliked and so horrible that when Jim Cornette turned on them, he actually got a huge face pop. So that tells you everything you need to know about the Dynamic Dudes. Even worse than them are another tag team with the initials DD, the Ding Dongs. They have a bell motif. They are two guys that love bells. The name sounds like a double entendre. It was just one match, but good God, it was bad enough. I don't know who thought that this was a good idea. Thank God they pulled the plug on it quick. But whatever it was, it sucked. And then number one, speaking of shitty, outdated gimmicks, PN News, the least valuable player in the history of the Clash of the Champions. A guy who I hated so much that I lovingly dubbed him Poop Nugget News. He's Poop Nugget. That's what he is. It's not a very creative name, but he was so bad that I was like, man, I don't want to put that much effort into making fun of him, to be perfectly honest. He almost doesn't deserve it. But yeah, PN News sucked. Just sucked. That early 90s rap gimmick. You know, back when, a time when for some reason everybody was obsessed with making rap cool for kids. And that's kind of like PN News was kind of born out of that whole idea. It still sucked. It sucked back then. It sucks now. It sucks even worse now. The fact that he had matches with Stone Cold Steve Austin and Diamond Dallas Page infuriates me. That this was the thing that happened, but, you know, it is what it is. So, Poop Nugget News. He is the least valuable player in the history of the Clash. And where'd my notes go? Okay. Now let's go into the most valuable players, the guys who contributed the most to the Clash throughout its entire history, all 35 episodes. Number 10, I'm going to go with Dustin Rhodes, the son of the American Dream. Had big shoes to fill, but I thought he did quite well when you look at the tag matches that he had, when you look at the match he had with Vader, which is a bit of a surprise hit on this show, and even looking at the match where he got to team up with Dusty, which was a thing that happened. A lot of good matches and moments came from Dustin Rhodes in this show, so I'm going to give some love to Dustin. This was, you know, he proved that he was a young guy with a lot of raw talent and was able to deliver when he was called upon. Number 9 is going to go to Rick Rude, who is famous for being a WWF superstar, but I think a lot of people agree that his work in WCW far exceeded anything that he did in the WWE, which says a lot because he was pretty good in the WWE. But when you look at his feud with Sting, specifically that episode with the injury angle, his run as U.S. champion and his big main event matches, I think Rick Rude did very well for himself in WCW and fit in perfectly. Number 8, one of my personal favorite WCW icons, Big Van Vader, who came on the scene as world champion, you know, feuded with Sting, and match-wise, as far as what he contributed to the Clash, had a very memorable match with Dustin Rhodes that I've already referenced, and had some memorable matches and moments with the likes of Sting and Cactus Jack, and, you know, he was in the Thunder Cage, and various other things. So Big Van Vader was a huge part of making WCW and by extension Clash of the Champions very special in the 90s. Number 7 is going to go to Terry Funk, the legend, who's really on here largely because of his feud with Ric Flair in 1989, which provided some of the Clash's best material, culminating in their legendary I Quit match at the end of the year. So I think Terry Funk deserves a lot of credit. He also had a really good match with Ricky Steamboat on an episode of The Clash that was very good as well. Number 6 is going to go to the faction of the New World Order, which really shaped the identity of the Clash of the Champions in the last 3 episodes. The August 96 episode, and then the 2 episodes in 1997. I mean, they changed the whole landscape of WCW and brought it to, you know, financial heights that they had never achieved before. And they were really the main focal point of the last 3 episodes of the show. So for that, and the fact that the 3 episodes were actually pretty good and actually helps get them out of a bit of a hole where they were relying on the Dungeon of Doom and Hulk Hogan and various other things. Now, Hulk Hogan was the hottest heel in the company. You had Randy Savage, you had Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, the Outsiders, and various other members. And the end result was a far more exciting and interesting show. So the presence of the New World Order definitely made the Clash better in its final editions. Another group that contributed a lot to the Clash in its closing days, the Cruiserweight division. When you look at some of the matches that these guys had in the last 3 episodes, specifically the ones for the title, you know, Rey Mysterio and Dean Malenko and Ultimo Dragon, Chris Jericho and Eddie Guerrero, and even I'll throw some love to Brian Pillman, who, even though he was around before the Cruiserweight division, he was kind of the light heavyweight, cruiserweight worker during the earlier episodes of The Clash and did very well for himself as well. Had the very first Nitro match, quite famously. But the Cruiserweight division definitely provided a lot of great action in the last 3 episodes of The Clash. 2 or 3. Their presence was more than welcomed. Number 4 is going to go to another group, the Tag Team division. Very much like Saturday Night's Main Event, the Tag Team division provided a lot of great matches throughout the history of the Clash. And, these are the teams that were being showcased in the NWA and WCW's tag team divisions throughout the history of the Clash. You had the Steiner brothers, who I am obviously a huge mark for. Those of you who watched the live stream, you got to see me mark out for Scott and Rick nonstop. The Road Warriors, Arn and Tully, who are the only team on this list, I think, that were on both Saturday Night's Main Event and the Clash of Champions. I think if anybody wants to correct me, just post in the comments down below, but I'm pretty sure they were the only team that got to contribute, at least in a significant way. The Enforcers, Arn Anderson and Larry Zbyszko, were a great team. The Hollywood Blondes, Steve Austin and Brian Pillman, fantastic team. The Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, the Fantastics, the Freebirds. Ding Dongs and the Master Blasters and the Dynamic Dudes did not make the list. But for the most part, the tag team division provided a lot. The Varsity Club was another solid one. Provided some solid entertainment throughout the show's history, without a doubt. Number 3 is going to go to Ricky Steamboat, who provided a lot in the tag team division that I already talked about, being paired up with guys like Dustin Rhodes. He also had arguably the greatest match of his career, the 2 out of 3 falls match with Ric Flair for the title on the 6th episode of The Clash. And he also had a great match with Terry Funk and various other big matches throughout the show's history. But Ricky Steamboat, arguably the greatest babyface in the history of the business, and provided some of his best work. He also had some really good matches with Stone Cold Steve Austin, then Stunning Steve Austin, and those were good as well. So Ricky Steamboat was a consummate professional and consistently delivered, especially when it came to the Clash of the Champions. Number 2 is going to go to the ultimate icon of WCW in my eyes, the man called Sting, who we get to really see his development, starting with that legendary match with Flair that went to the 45-minute draw, and then evolving into the top babyface in the company. Had various matches with various guys, from his work with the Horsemen to his work against Great Muta, to his work with Vader, his work with Rick Rude, which was one of the best episodes in the history of the Clash. Various other things. I mean, Sting was all over the place and did pretty much whatever they asked him to do. And as a top face, as that icon, that larger-than-life superhero babyface, I think Sting played his role quite well. It definitely helped to make the Clash special. And it is appropriate that the first Clash ended with him in the 45-minute draw with Flair, and the final Clash ends with an image of him with the Crow Sting delivering a message to the NWO. So throughout, you get, not only do you get a history of the evolution of WCW, but you really get one of Sting as well in his whole career. But the number 1 MVP of the Clash of the Champions, it's got to be the Nature Boy, woo, Ric Flair. You got to walk that aisle. To be the man, you gotta beat the man. I mean, we all love Rick. If you're a wrestling fan, you love Ric Flair, and that's just how it is. And when you look at the Clash of the Champions, Flair's remembered as being arguably, I say arguably, some people say unquestionably, I say arguably, the greatest worker in the history of the business. And when you look at the Clash, he delivered some of the greatest matches of his career. The 45-minute draw with Sting, the 2 out of 3 falls with Steamboat, the teaming with Arn to face the Hollywood Blondes in a 2 out of 3 falls match, and the I Quit match with Terry Funk. I mean, those are some of the greatest. I mean, if I were going to do a top 10 favorite Ric Flair match list, those 4 matches might be on there. So when it came time for the Clash, baby, Nature Boy, he almost always delivered, and was typically a very reliable source for a big main event for the Clash of the Champions. So the Nature Boy, he's the #1 MVP. Now let's get into the matches. We're going to do the top 15 best matches, my personal pick for the top 15 best, as well as the 5 worst. And let's start with the negatives, shall we? Number 5, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage versus The Butcher and Kevin Sullivan from Clash of Champions 30. Yeah, I mean, this match kind of exemplified everything that was bad about the early Hulk Hogan run in WCW, where it was just very cartoony, very over the top, and the whole act of Hogan conquering the bad guys had just gotten stale by this point. Also, we get Randy Savage waking up Hulk Hogan with a flying elbow drop, which is a very infamous spot. So that one gets the nod. Number 4 is going to go to Butch Reed versus Stephen Casey from episode 5. This was a match that was supposed to be a squash match, should have been a squash match. Just give Butch Reed a dominant win. And this is where I think WWF kind of had an advantage over NWA and WCW, where NWA tried to make every match amazing. And in doing so, you know, this match got like 20 minutes. I was like, guys, Butch Reed, dominate, gets a strong win. You could wrap that up in under 5. Where WWE would take those type of matches and wrap it up in under 5. Which is the way it should be. So this was just a long, drawn-out, boring match that was way longer than it ever needed to be. And again, it just should have told a very simple story. Butch Reed gets a dominating win. Bing, bang, boom. But they felt the need to stretch it out much longer than it ever needed to be. Number 3 is actually one that comes from the first Clash of Champions, which was a very well-regarded show. But this match didn't work for me at all. The Road Warriors and Dusty Rhodes, which you think, oh, it's Road Warriors and Dusty Rhodes. It's got to be good, right? Taking on the Powers of Pain and Ivan Koloff in a barbed wire match. Oh my God, what's wrong with this? It was short, it was poorly executed, and it was sloppy. This was not a good match, and easily the worst part of the first Clash of Champions. Number 2, my boy, PN News versus Diamond Dallas Page from the Clash of Champions 18. This match makes me sick because not only did PN News face Diamond Dallas Page, he beat Diamond Dallas Page. That is infuriating. The fact that that happened is insulting. I know Diamond Dallas Page wasn't a finished product at this point, but still, the fact that that even happened just upsets me greatly. So, yeah, that's infuriating. But the #1 worst match in Clash of Champions history, it's going to go to the Ding Dongs versus Cougar Jay and George South from the 7th edition of the Clash. Yes, the Ding Dongs. That's all there is to say. Like that's all I have to say about it. It's the Ding Dongs. It's the worst match in Clash history. So that is that. All right, but from there, we're going to go into the 15 best matches that the Clash ever had, at least in my opinion. Let's pull up my list. And here we go. All right, number 15 is a tie. I talked about these matches earlier, but it's the 3 Cruiserweight title matches in the final 3 episodes of The Clash. Rey Mysterio versus Malenko, Ultimo Dragon versus Malenko, and Chris Jericho versus Eddie Guerrero. 3 matches were very good. Great showcases for the Cruiserweight division, and a great showcase for guys like Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko, Ultimo Dragon, Chris Jericho, and Eddie Guerrero. All very talented guys, great workers. And this was just a good showcase for the Cruiserweight division. So if you're a fan of the Cruiserweight division, and you're a fan of those names I just listed, I highly recommend checking out all 3 of those matches. I don't necessarily have a preference of one over any of the other 3. I just thought, you know, it's the Cruiserweights. They delivered. They had the best matches of the final 3 episodes of The Clash. Let's give them all some love. Number 14, Barry Windham versus Sting for the U.S. title from Clash of the Champions 3. Sting main evented, you know, He main evented the first one against Flair, main evented the second one teaming with Dusty, and then he gets to main event the third one up against Barry Windham for the U.S. title on the line. So it's obvious that Sting is being positioned as like a top star. And I thought this match was very good. Very good showcase for both guys, and they worked very well together. So it's not a classic necessarily like the match with Flair, but it is a very good showcase for two very talented guys. Next up, number 13 from Clash of the Champions 9, we have Lex Luger versus Flying Brian for the U.S. title. Excellent match. Luger and Brian, they worked well together, and I think it's that very natural clash of style where Brian's the high-flying athletic guy, Luger's the power guy, and you put them together, and the clash of styles just makes magic. And I think they worked very well with each other. Number 12, the Midnight Express versus Ric Flair and Barry Windham from Clash of the Champions 4. You got the Midnight Express taking on the Horsemen, so that's a very nice tag team match, and very good. I thought it was a great main event match, and it was cool to see these four guys working with each other, and yeah, it was just a really good main event. I really enjoyed it. Another tag team main event I enjoyed was number 11, Sting and Ric Flair versus the Great Muta and Dick Slater from Clash of the Champions 8. Excellent main event that furthered some storylines. It was also nice to see the enemies Sting and Ric Flair teaming with each other, so that was also cool to see. So just a very exciting main event, not typical of one that you would see. I think the Great Muta being involved adds a lot to it. I think Dick Slater being involved adds a lot to it. It just feels like a very fresh and different match. So it's a main event match that I highly recommend checking out. Number 10 is a six-man tag from Clash of the Champions 23. We've got Sting, the British Bulldog, and Dustin Rhodes. See, Dustin, I tell you, he played a big role in the Clash. Taking on Big Van Vader, Sid Vicious, and Rick Rude. A lot of star power there. And, you know, you got the two big guys, but you got Rick Rude teaming up with Vader and Sid to round out the heel team. And great match. It's just a very exciting match and a great showcase for the stars that they had at the time. Number 9, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat versus Terry Funk at Clash of the Champions 7. I think the Clash of Styles helped. Funk was like the hottest heel they had at the time following his attack on Ric Flair. And Ricky Steamboat, as I said, is the greatest babyface in the history of the business, so you put them together, it makes magic. Very good match, very good main event match for this edition of Clash of the Champions. Number 8, Sting, Nikita Koloff, and my boys, the Steiner Brothers, versus Big Van Vader, Rick Rude, Jake Roberts, and the Super Invader, who is the one that really looks like he doesn't belong here, in a 4 versus 4 elimination match at Clash of the Champions 20. Basically, it's a Survivor Series match, and a very good one at that. I think that this match is probably better than most regular Survivor Series matches, and it was very good. And again, you got Sting, you got the Steiners, you got Big Van Vader, you got Rick Rude, you got Jake Roberts, all the different feuds and storylines going on at the time, and the end result was something very entertaining and very good. And number 7 on this list, we've got Ric Flair versus Sting, but not from the first Clash of the Champions. No. This is Sting versus Flair in the unification match at Clash of the Champions 27. This would be the final clash before Hulk Hogan would arrive and jumpstart his whole feud with Ric Flair and their series of matches. So this was kind of the end of an era in a way, because once the Hogan era kicked in, like, we all know what happened there. But yeah, it was cool to see Flair and Sting go at it again for the world title with 2 world titles on the line, the WCW title and the international title. And it was very good. A very good match between 2 guys that typically worked very well with each other. So no complaints here. I guess the only negative I have to say is that it wasn't as good as their Clash of the Champions 1 match. Number 6, bit of a surprise sleeper hit. Dustin Rhodes versus Vader from 29. This is a match that didn't have a lot of build-up or anything. It was just throwing 2 guys out there to see what happened. They had this wild, intense match. Highly recommend checking this one out, especially if you're a fan of both guys. I think this is an excellent match and one of the finest matches in the history of the Clash, especially if you like badass, knockdown, drag out, throw it all down type of fights. I mean, this match was awesome, I thought. Number 5, the Hollywood Blondes versus the Horsemen, Flair and Arn, for the WCW tag titles in a 2 out of 3 falls match from Clash of the Champions 23. Excellent main event. If you like tag team wrestling, you're going to enjoy this. Also, you get a young Steve Austin and Brian Pillman working against Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. It's great. I highly recommend checking it out. Number 4, the Enforcers versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Dustin Rhodes for the WCW tag titles from Clash of the Champions 17. Excellent match. Excellent tag team match. And it was great to see Ricky come in for this match. It was great to see him and Dustin paired up, and it was a satisfying match all around. Just excellent, excellent stuff. I think it's the finest tag match in the history of the Clash, which is really saying a lot because there were a lot of great tag matches in the history of the Clash. Number 3, Ric Flair versus Terry Funk in the I Quit match from Clash of the Champions 10. One of the more famous matches to happen at the Clash. It's a wild brawl, great match. It was a perfect climax to the feud that these two had up to this point. It was amazing, loved it, great stuff, and it really capped off Ric Flair's 1989, which was probably the greatest year of his career. When you look at the series of matches with Steamboat, and then look at the feud with Terry Funk, I mean, this is probably Ric Flair at his absolute peak, and this match was great. One of the finest matches to ever main event a Clash. Number 2, it's, guess who? Ric Flair versus Sting for the NWA World title from the very first Clash of the Champions. The first main event of the Clash was really the match that put the Clash on the map, and major respect to Ric Flair because the work he did in this match really helped to put Sting on the map. I mean, this is the match that, in my mind, made Sting. And because that happened, it allowed Sting to kind of grow, develop, and become the icon of WCW, and one of my personal favorite wrestlers of all time. So thank you, Ric Flair, for making Sting as awesome as he ultimately became. And I think it's a stellar main event. Some people complain that it ended in a draw. I'm okay with it because it builds to something bigger down the road. So I was okay with that. I would have been okay with Sting winning the title as well if they decided to go that route. Well, how cool would that have been to have Sting and Randy Savage win the world title on the same day? God, I would have been in heaven. But in any case, Flair and Sting, they were great with each other, and I think this was their personal best match with each other. I thought this was outstanding and a great first main event for the Clash. But the number 1 greatest match in the history of the Clash of the Champions has to be the main event of Clash of the Champions 6, the 2 out of 3 falls match for the NWA World title, Ricky Steamboat defending against Ric Flair. The trilogy of matches that these guys had were outstanding. All 3 of their matches were great, and this one may have been their best. I don't know. I love all 3 of their matches, but this one was outstanding, as you would expect, and set the stage nicely for a 3rd match that was needed. So you got 2 guys, arguably the greatest worker in the history of the business in Ric Flair, arguably the greatest babyface in the history of the business in Ricky Steamboat. You let him go about an hour and just let them make magic, and that's what they did. They made magic, and in my opinion, easily, when I was putting this list together, that one was easily my pick for the best match in the history of the Clash of the Champions. But overall, not too shabby, having no shame in having to come behind that match and that list of 15. God, I kind of want to go back and watch those 15 matches again because those were all great, great matches. But now we are going to go into the episodes. That's kind of where we're going to go into now. Let me put in my list. There were a lot of bad episodes, and there were a lot of really good ones too. It was kind of almost half and half. So I really had a hard time putting together both a worst list and a best list for Clash of the Champions. But I think I've got it squared away and settled down. Number 5 for worst episodes, we're going to do top 5 worst episodes and top 10 best episodes. Number 5 worst episode is Clash of the Champions 5, St. Valentine's Day Massacre from February '89. This is the one that featured a bizarre main event between the Road Warriors and the Varsity Club. That was a bit of a debacle. You had Lex Luger versus the Blackmailer and the aforementioned Scott Casey versus Butch Reed match. A bunch of uninteresting matches. Most of them went too long. Just a dull show. Just a very dull, lifeless show, which is really disappointing considering how good the earlier episodes of The Clash were, the first 4. And then you get this one, it's like, what the fuck happened here? Fortunately, they bounced back with 6 and the Steamboat Flair match. But this one was in the early NWA days of The Clash, this was by far the worst episode. Number 4, Clash of the Champions 12, Fall Brawl Mountain Madness from September 1990. This is the one that was main evented by the Black Scorpion versus Sting. You also got the TV debut of a very young and very green Kevin Nash as he debuted as part of the Master Blasters. Just a bad episode. The Black Scorpion situation really leaves a poor taste in my mouth, and there wasn't enough. There weren't enough redeeming qualities on the show to make me consider giving it a recommendation of any time, other than putting on a worst of Clash episode list. Number 3, Clash of the Champions 16, another Fall Brawl. This time, the one from September 1991. Bill Kazmaier was in the main event. It was the Enforcers versus Rick Steiner and Bill Kazmaier. That enough was bad, and that alone was enough to make it bad. But this was also the first episode after Ric Flair's departure, and his presence was sorely missed. This was a very sad state of affairs to see where things were after Flair left the company. So this one's more depressing than anything else. Number 2, Clash of the Champions 31 from January 1996, the final episode before the NWO shows up. Thank God. This one was largely known for the Sherry Colonel Parker wedding, which was wildly unfunny and terrible, and I hated every minute of it. And you also had the Renegade in a long match against Paul Orndorff, so that doesn't help. But really, it was the wedding segments that really dragged the show down and made it suck. So Clash of the Champions 31, it was the last bad one, but boy oh boy was it a doozy of a bad one. And then the number 1 worst episode in the history of the Clash has to be Clash of the Champions 13, Thanksgiving Thunder, November 1990. A glut of matches. There were a ton of matches on the show. None of them were good. Like, it was just this endless series of just terrible match after terrible match after terrible match. And then you had the main event, which was Ric Flair versus Butch Reed, which was not a good match. Probably, a lot of people point to Ric Flair's match with JYD as being his worst in the history of the Clash. I tend to lean more towards this one, just for being a dull, uninteresting, terrible match. And yeah, it wasn't good. Wasn't good. But that ends that. Now let's go into the positives. Let's talk about my favorite episodes in the history of the Clash. Let's wrap this video up. Alrighty. Number 10, Clash of the Champions 21 from November 1992. Sting versus Rick Rude in the King of Cable tournament match. You had Steamboat and Shane Douglas taking on Barry Windham and Dustin Rhodes for the tag titles. This is the episode that featured Wyndham's heel turn, which was great and well done. You also had a little bit of Gaga in there with Medusa and Paulie Dangerously. I thought that stuff was really funny. It was actually Paul Heyman's final appearance for WCW. Very entertaining stuff, just a consistently entertaining show from top to bottom, and I enjoyed it. Number 9, Clash of the Champions 20 from September 1992. 92 was actually kind of a revival year for the Clash, where they started delivering some solid episodes after a bit of a down period after Flair left. You had Steamboat versus Austin. You had the elimination match that I talked about, and those alone were enough to make it a really solid episode. Next up, we've got number 8, Clash of the Champions 28 from August 1994. This is the one with the Hogan-Flair rematch, where they did the Tanya Harding-Nancy Kerrigan angle with Hogan getting attacked by the Masked Man. And that stuff was a bit ridiculous, but I thought the Hogan-Flair match was actually pretty good. It was actually very different from their usual matches, with Hogan selling the leg injury, and I thought that all came off really well. You also had another Steamboat versus Austin match, and you also had Dustin Rhodes teaming up with Dusty. So plenty of good stuff on this show to make it entertaining, and overall, pretty solid show. Probably Hogan's, do I want to say probably Hogan's best Clash of the Champions match? I'd probably go that far. Next up, we had the June 1994 episode. This was number 27. This was the one where Sting and Flair main evented to unify the titles. You also had a bit of a hidden gem, Steven Regal at the time, taking on Larry Zbyszko for the TV title in the culmination of their feud, which I thought was that was a pretty good match as well. So good stuff all around on this one. And again, this one was kind of the end of an era for WCW as they would transition into the Hogan stuff moving forward. Next up is Clash of the Champions 18, a show that was just filled with good matches. You had Sting and Steamboat versus Austin and Rude. If that's not an awesome main event, I don't know what is. You had Dustin, Wyndham, and Ron Simmons taking on the Dangerous Alliance in a six-man tag. That was a really good match. You had the Steiner brothers taking on Big Van Vader and Curtis Hughes, and it was probably the best match of Curtis Hughes' career. That was an awesome, badass match. And you also had Cactus Jack versus Van Hammer in a Falls Count Anywhere match. That was actually pretty good and memorable. So a bunch of good matches on the show, just great action all the way from start to finish, and just great stuff. And it was one of those like rebuilding episodes for The Clash. And really, you know, this was January 92. It was the first really good episode of 92, so which was a pretty good year. Next up at number 5, we've got Clash of the Champions 9, the New York Knockout. November 1989. It was Flair versus Funk in the I Quit match, Luger versus Pillman, and Cornette turning on the Dynamic Dudes, which made me very, very happy. So number 9 gets a huge nod for me, mainly for the main event and for the Luger-Pillman match, but that Cornette turning on the Dynamic Dudes puts it a little bit over the top. So we'll put it at number 5. Number 4, number 23. This was Flair and Arn taking on the Hollywood Blondes, Vader, Sid, and Rude taking on Sting, Dustin, and the Bulldog, and Wyndham versus Scorpio for the NWA title, which was another one of those secret gems in the Clash of the Champions. Really good match. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this was also Eric Bischoff's first show as executive producer of WCW, so it's historic from that standpoint. Number 3, Clash of the Champions 17, November 1991. This one is known for one reason. It's Sting versus Rude with the injury angle where Sting got attacked by Lex Luger and then got taken to the hospital and rushed his way back to face Rude and ultimately dropped the title in a short match. But that whole angle and everything and how that was done, I thought was excellent. It was like the first really good thing the Clash had done for a while up to that point. Again, after, a lot of the 90s episodes were bad and a lot of the 91 episodes were bad, but this one kind of righted the ship at least a little bit. And we got that major angle with Sting and Rick Rude, which I thought helped out a lot. We also got Steamboat's return to help Dustin Rhodes win the tag titles from the Enforcers, which I said was one of my favorite matches in Clash history. So you got a great angle, one of the best matches in Clash history, a big return, great stuff all around. It's an excellent episode. Number 2 is going to go to Clash of the Champions 6, Ragin' Cajun from April 1989, put up against WrestleMania 5. And this one's on here as high as it is for one reason. It features the greatest match in Clash history, Flair versus Steamboat in a 2 out of 3 falls match that went almost an hour. So that match alone is enough to make it the second best episode. But the best episode is going to go to the match that went up against WrestleMania 4, Clash of the Champions 1, the very first Clash of the Champions from April 1988. You've got the Sting Flair main event. You've got Luger and Barry Windham taking on Arn and Tully. You've got the Fantastics versus the Midnight Express, and those 3 matches right there made for an excellent night of wrestling action from start to finish. Again, the barbed wire match was bad, but everything else delivered in spades, and was just an excellent, excellent show and a great showcase for the talents that the NWA boasted at the time with Sting, Ric Flair, the other Horsemen, the tag team division, Lex Luger, Barry Windham, and a very different identity from the WWF at the time. And it was just a bold move to go up against WrestleMania, and the end result was an excellent episode, and in my opinion, the finest episode in the history of the Clash. So I guess you could say it's kind of sad that they started off with the best one and never topped it, but the first episode was just that damn good. So, phew! Let me take a swig of water. That concludes the best and the worst of Saturday night's main event and the Clash of the Champions, and concludes my almost year-long journey to watch all the episodes and just have a bunch of fun with it. So once again, thank you all for joining me with this really long video that turned out to be way longer than I intended it to be. But once again, it was, for one last time, it was fun to talk about Saturday night's main event and the Clash of the Champions and what those shows offered and the great memories that they've created for me. And getting back and finally getting a chance to go through and watch every single episode of those shows was really a pleasure and really a joy. And that's one of the major positives of the WWE Network, is that you get to do stuff like that. So that concludes this video. Thank you all for watching. And much more videos we close out.